Hi guys, Jessica Williams again, back with another chapter of my book, The Gateway to Imagia, The Tale of Sam Little. I am going to read chapter 7 today. I hope you guys have been enjoying following along. So, without any more comments on that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with chapter 7, The Guardian. Since Sam's arrival into this strange new world, he had heard and seen some fairly strange and outrageous things. Regardless of any of the happenings he had experienced thus far, the idea that he could actually bring to life something he had imagined would have normally been the least likely of things to shock him. Up until this very moment, he had been mostly convinced of the idea that the world he was so largely engrossed in was, in fact, entirely of his own making. It was simply his birthday wish coming to pass. Despite the fact that Sam had seen things that he had never dreamt of in all of his wildest dreams, he had been convinced that nothing here existed before the fateful wish was made. Now, with one sentence, Sam's perfect picture of this world was shattered. Taryn's accusation of Sam's ability to create something so foul and dangerous shocked the very core of what he had come to believe. His claim was not what bothered Sam, but rather the fact that someone here was capable of connecting his imagination to this world. This meant that there was more to this strange place than Sam's mind could understand. For in Sam's world, no one knew of his imagination. Things were not as they seemed. Taryn seemed as shocked by the creature's sudden appearance as the rest of them were, but he was the only one that had drawn the sudden conclusion. Sam had pictured the creature so vividly in his mind mere moments before its attack. The idea that he had imagined to life something that could hurt any one of his friends sickened him, and the fact that Taryn connected those dots was confusing. As these thoughts raced haphazardly through his brain, Sam wondered just where he was if it wasn't his world. Everyone was still staring, bewildered at Sam. Though only a minute had passed since Taryn's revelation, time felt as though it had stopped. Sam looked around at everyone. Kisa merely sat with her tail twitching patiently, while Yetu simply watched him eagerly for his response. Taryn, on the other hand, was still watching him as if he was waiting for a confession. Sam had no way of knowing what he was to confess to. He knew that of all the creatures he would choose to bring to life, this dangerous one was not even an option. He'd never imagined something so frightening or menacing as the one that had just attacked them. But there was no mistaking the coincidence of the situation. He had seen the beast so clearly, and within seconds, the same image had appeared, real and monstrous, right in front of his eyes. If he truly was responsible for its creation, then it wasn't intentional, because the creature was spawned from a nightmare, and not of his own creation. Sam was confused, and the puzzle wasn't getting any closer to being solved with the silence. In an attempt to start putting the puzzle together, he started with the first mildly coherent thought that crossed his mind. He looked at Taryn and said, "Let me get this straight. You think that I brought that thing to life with my imagination?" "Yes, I do." "Why would you even think that?" Sam asked. Taryn was still absent-mindedly shaking his head slowly. "I saw you when you were trying to explain what you dreamt. I saw the focus in your eyes as you tried to picture it. You tried to tell us what was in your nightmare, and then that thing attacked us from out of nowhere." He stepped closer to Sam. "At first I couldn't understand how it was even possible that you brought that thing here, but then you said it was what you imagined right before the attack. That sort of sealed my suspicion. You imagined it, and then it appeared." Stunned, Sam asked, "You think that I wanted that thing to pop out of the forest and eat us all? Why would I want that?" "No. It was more than likely unintentional, but one second it wasn't there, and the next second it was. How else can you explain it?" "I have no idea, but I didn't bring it here. It's just impossible." Sam was getting frustrated. The conversation was getting them nowhere. "Do you have any other ideas then? Because I'd be glad to hear them." Taryn folded his arms in patience. Sam didn't know how he could possibly explain anything right now. It was only a moment before when this world made some sense. Taryn may have wanted an explanation, but Sam hadn't even yet explained how he'd gotten here. And now that it was obvious to him that this wasn't truly his world, he wasn't exactly sure if he even knew the answer to that anymore. The time had approached to come clean, and Sam didn't know quite how to put his explanation into perspective. He looked guiltily at Yetus before turning to face Karen again. The idea that he would have to tell his best friend that he was merely a figment of an overactive imagination didn't settle well, but there was no getting around it now. Sam mentally ran through his story, but in the end, it sounded ridiculous and childish to take credit for the creation of an entire world. When he tried to start explaining things, the words failed him. I don't know how any of this happened. Sam tried to go on, but his thoughts were all jumbled up. He was becoming entirely too frustrated with everything now. Combined with the lack of sleep, Sam's mood was starting to waver severely. Ugh, none of this is making any sense. He stomped over to the fire and sat down with his back turned to everyone. He sat for a moment in silence and then mumbled to himself, "This is stupid. Why would I need to use my imagination if I'm already—" He cut off his thought, not knowing quite how to finish it. He must have spoken louder than he thought, because to his surprise, Taryn finished his thought perfectly. "You mean, why use imagination if you're already in an imaginary world?" Sam's skin prickled with goosebumps. He sat there, staring at the flames, wondering how Taryn knew. Taryn had already seemed so keen to this mysterious world. At first Sam thought it to be mere coincidence. In his world, if he had imagined a person like Taryn, he would probably be the know-it-all rogue warrior type. But it wasn't his world, and Taryn was not part of his vivid imagination. It solidified one fact. There was more to this place than Sam knew, and this man that he had befriended could help piece together the mystery. The fire burned brightly, warming the clearing with its protective glow. He was still unsure what to say. He wanted to turn around to look back at the others, but sat unmoving. He mindlessly played with a blade of grass and stared at the flames as they licked the night air. Taryn knew more than Sam gave him credit for. His perception of this world was changing by the second, and he wasn't sure what would happen next. If he really was capable of unleashing a monster from his mind, then where did that leave his new friends? How could he jeopardize their safety, especially Yetus? Now that he was no longer blind to what he was feeling, he didn't want to show anyone how scared he was at the moment. It was hard for him to admit this new sensation of fear in the first place. As Sam sat and pondered what to say, Taryn came to sit down next to him. They both stared into the fire. He sighed and looked over at Sam. When Sam refused to return the look, Taryn placed a hand softly on his shoulder and said, "I know you're confused, and that this is hard to believe, but this world that you've entered is not yours. I know where you come from, Sam. I understand what you're thinking. I even know how you got here." Sam finally looked over at him. "And believe it or not," Taryn assured him, "I even know why you came." Those words sent Sam's goosebumps into high gear. His head was swirling now. As much as he felt the need to explain everything, he could tell by the tone of Taryn's voice and the knowledge of his words that somehow no explanation was needed. "But how do you know?" Sam whispered. "I know more than you could possibly imagine." Things weren't going at all how Sam had planned. From the very beginning of this adventure, he had been blind to many things. His lack of knowledge of what he'd gotten himself into was right on the top of the list. The mask of night was complete now, bringing with it a slight chill to the air. As a result, the four travelers were now huddled close to the warmth of the fire. Sam was leaning up against Yetus. He had finally come to join Sam by the fireside, after his initial hesitation. When he noticed how upset Sam was, he had an overwhelming feeling of helplessness for his friend, and wasn't sure how to approach him. After Taryn had talked to him, Sam had managed to regain his composure and asked Yetus to come over and join them. Kisa also settled gratefully next to the fire. She seemed more eager than the rest for the unraveling of the evening's mysteries. She calmly, with front paws crossed gracefully in front of her, listened to every word spoken. Not much had been said so far. Sam had been pushing Taryn for a more thorough explanation of his most recent comment regarding his knowledge of things, but Taryn was stubbornly avoiding the details. Sam decided to push again. "Aw, come on! Why can't you just tell me more about this world? If you know so much, then it can't be that hard just to give me a few little details." Taryn rolled his eyes for the 9th time since this started. "It's not my place to explain, kid." "Why not?" Sam whined. "Well, for one, I don't think your brain is going to take much more if you don't at least attempt to get some more sleep." Sam threw his arms up so suddenly, and he startled Yetus. He growled his annoyance, and Sam ignored him and said, "Oh yeah, sleep! Now that's a great idea." His sudden rant was lined with sarcasm. Remember what happened the last 2 times I slept?" Yetus grumbled a question at Taryn. Taryn looked from Yetus to Sam. "Seeing as how you have an exceedingly vast knowledge of his undecipherable language, would you mind translating again?" Then under his breath he added, which by the way is getting incredibly annoying. Sam heard the snide remark and snapped back, "Don't get mad at him just because you can't understand what he says." And he asked if you thought I might have another nightmare if I sleep. I want to know what you think about that too. "Well, first up, grunting and growling isn't a language." Yetus frowned and Sam patted him on the shoulder. "You're avoiding the question again. Am I going to have a nightmare every time I close my eyes?" Sam asked. Taryn heaved a defeated sigh. "I can honestly say that I don't know. I venture to say the chances are pretty good, but everyone is different." Kisa finally decided to speak at this. "You know, you really are quite cryptic. Or perhaps that is your objective? Do you or don't you have any plans on explaining anything? I'd be more than amused to hear your take on this turn of events." "Frankly," Taryn snarled, "I don't think I'm the right one to explain anything to you." The feeling of annoyance flooded the atmosphere around him as he spoke. "Trust me, in the morning you will get all the answers you want. We aren't that far away now. We'll be there shortly after the sun rises, if we leave before dawn." Sam was convinced that sleeping could only end with more screaming. The thought of waking up to hear his own blood-curdling cries again sent a chill up his spine. He shook off the sensation. "Can we just leave now? I don't really even feel like sleeping," he admitted. "I told you already that we can't go gallivanting around the forest in the pitch black of night. Well, unless you have aspirations to become something's meal tonight, and in that case you can go alone. I'm perfectly happy in my living form." Sam swallowed hard. He could hear Yetus doing the same. Kisa was probably higher up on the food chain, so didn't seem fazed by the idea of night travel. She had quite a few more advantages than the rest of them. Sam gave in. "Fine, but I'm not sleeping, so you might as well tell me something to pass the time." He took a page from Taryn and tried to threaten with fear and added, "Unless you want me to accidentally imagine up another monster from my next nightmare." Yetu snorted a laugh as Sam smiled a mischievous grin. They both expected that they had Taryn backed into a corner because it would be ludicrous to want to fight another creature if it was like the last one. Taryn shrugged. "I got plenty of arrows, and I could use the target practice anyhow." He was smirking. Both their jaws dropped slightly at the finality of Taryn's retort. No one spoke much after this. Yetus yawned loudly and laid his heavy head down on the ground. Sam teased him a little to keep him awake, but Yetus' exhaustion from the trek went out. Kisa curled up into a ball, reminding Sam of Cooper again. Despite the fact that she was so intelligent, she looked more like a cat now than ever. Yetus was snoring softly as he slept on his stomach, and Taryn was standing with his back to them, as a sentinel watching the darkness. Sam fought the heaviness of his eyes for as long as he could, but succumbed regardless. He slept again, this time more restlessly. When his mind would start to fade into dreams, the images would frighten him and he would wake up suddenly, nearly jumping off the ground each time. When the early morning sun started to melt the black of night away, Sam found himself waking in his own screams again. The screams were nothing like the ones of the previous day, but they were enough to rattle his nerves. Taryn was first to speak, as the three roused from their sleep. "Let's get going. If you carry Sam," he said to Yetus, "then we'll probably make it there in about 2 hours." Yetus nodded and placed a yawning Sam onto his shoulders. At first Sam tried to argue the point so he could walk, but as he sunk down into his familiar perch, he realized how comfortable he really was and decided to go with it. There'd be plenty of walking to do later. Keese had already been up and hunted. The only sign of her doomed prey was the blue feather that now lingered on the tuft of her hair by her mouth. She had been calmly licking herself clean when they departed the clearing. The thought of her eating a raw bird wasn't exactly a pleasant thought, but Sam's stomach growled anyways. He hadn't eaten anything since his birthday cake, and by now there was no longer any way of knowing just how long ago that was. Taryn had doused what was left of the fire and started to lead them through the trees ahead. Sam looked behind them for a moment and thought about what his mom might be making for breakfast. His stomach growled again as he thought of her special chocolate chip pancakes, but the thought left sooner than it came, and they all began trudging through the forest. As Sam sat there, he absorbed every aspect of the morning gray forest in hopes of distracting his mind from the want to eat. Even louder than before, his stomach growled again. This time, Yetus cocked his head up to look at Sam. He grumbled a question. "I know, but I can't help it. My stomach won't stop growling. I've never been this hungry before." His voice was longing as he thought again of food. "I hope there's food where we're going." Taryn overheard Sam. "Hungry, huh? There'll be food where we're going, I'm sure of it. But until then—" He stopped in mid-sentence and then started looking around the ground for something Sam couldn't see. He found a baseball-sized rock and took aim somewhere into the tree high above them. It was a direct hit to his target, and the air was suddenly filled with small seeds that twirled around and down like miniature helicopters. Sam watched them fall, amused at the scene. He reached his hand up and caught 3 in his open palm. He looked down at Taryn from his perch and said, "Hey, we have a tree like this in our backyard at home. My mom calls it a whirlybird tree. Only our whirlybirds are brown instead of purple." Taryn nodded. "And I bet you can't eat the ones from your tree either." He grabbed at a single seed and caught it effortlessly, amazing Sam at his natural stealth. He then put the bulbous end in his mouth and bit down. He dropped the feathery stem and, through his chewing, said, "They're pretty good for a snack if you can get to them before the wildlife does." He smiled, then added, "Eat up." Taryn threw another rock and released another round of the peculiar fruit. Yetus was already gathering them up with his hands while Sam reached in the air to catch them as they fell. For a moment Sam was hesitant. It was the first time he'd eaten since his dinner the night before, and, as strange as it felt to eat something new and unusual, his stomach growled again in protest. He placed the first one in his mouth and bit down. The taste was sweeter than any fruit he'd ever eaten. They had enough for the journey and started walking again. Once Sam started eating them, he couldn't stop, and by the time they ran out of the seeds, he was temporarily satisfied. Just as Taryn had expected, it didn't take very long to reach their destination. Ahead of them was another clearing in the trees, only this time the clearing was significantly larger. In the middle there was what appeared to be a large grassy roof simply lying on the ground. The closer they got, it was more obvious that the roof was actually a covering to a large hole that slanted downward. At the bottom of the slope there was a rough wooden door with no handle and one very dingy circular window. Next to the hole by the roof was a good-sized lump of rock that was covered in mossy green growth. Taryn held up a hand to stop them from going further. "Hold on," he ordered. "Why? Isn't this where you wanted us to go?" asked Sam. Taryn just smiled crookedly. He seemed to be waiting for something. While they stood there, Sam started to focus more on the strange place. His eyes wandered slowly over the picture and came to rest on that mossy lump that had sat at the hole's entrance. It wasn't very big, but there was something oddly suspicious about it. Sam saw that Taryn was watching the rock intently. He wasn't sure what could be so interesting about it, so he tried to look closer as well. The longer he stared, the more he couldn't deny that the mossy lump was actually moving. It was methodically rising up and down. The strange mound of earth was breathing. It started to stir. Sam gasped slightly as Yetus retreated a few steps. He noticed the breathing stone too. Sam shot a look towards Taryn, expecting to see his bow armed and ready. It wasn't. Taryn merely continued to smile and stare. The earthy lump opened an eye. There would have been no knowing where to expect an eye, and a chilling thought of the deceptor crossed his thoughts. The eye blinked. 4 scaled legs suddenly emerged at its sides, and the mossy lump was unexpectedly barreling for them. Kisa hissed, and Taryn held up a hand for her to ease back. He reached into a pouch he carried on his belt and threw something onto the ground that looked like moldy mushrooms. The creature skidded to a halt and gobbled them up. Taryn bent down on one knee and started to talk to the weird creature. "Always hungry, aren't you? Doesn't he ever feed you?" He grinned back at Sam as he patted the creature's scaly head. If it weren't for the stubby snout and oversized eyes, it would have easily passed for a pint-sized alligator. Sam slid down from Yetus. He slowly approached the strange creature and asked Taryn, "What the heck is that thing? Is it dangerous?" "This harmless lump of a creature?" Taryn asked. He scratched behind the hole in its head that served it as its ear. "Nah, this is Warg." Sam looked questioningly down at the creature. "This is who you wanted to bring me to see?" It didn't seem possible that something so unspectacular could be able to answer so many questions, but he knew better than to judge something for its size. Taryn laughed at Sam's speculation. "No, this is just his, well, for lack of a better word, his guard dog." He stood up, and Warg rubbed up affectionately against Taryn's leg. He was panting with his tongue as it lolled lopsided out of its mouth. It made him look almost cute. Almost. As he watched the funny creature, he thought of what it would be like to have Titus here with him. He'd probably be enjoying himself. Though he felt greedy to think it, he wanted to have his faithful dog here with him too. It wasn't that he was unthankful for his granted wish in having Yetus by his side. It was simply that he truly missed his 4-legged friend. "A dog? Wow, my dog doesn't look anything like him. He doesn't even have hair. Cool." Sam reached down to let him sniff his hand. He figured if it was like a dog, best be safe and let him get a good whiff before actually petting him. Warg sniffed Sam's hand and then transferred from Taryn's leg to his legs and started to settle by his feet for another round of attention. Sam smiled at the funny little creature. Behind him, Yetus slumbered, closer to him with a twinge of jealousy. Yetus bent down to sniff Warg and received an unexpected lick on the nose. Yetus snorted and wiped off the slobber as he grumbled something low. Sam laughed and said, "Actually, I think that means he likes you, Yetus." Yetus rolled his eyes and shook his head with a bit of disgust still lingering on his face from Warg's attempted affection. "So, if this is just the guard dog," asked Sam, "then who is his owner?" There was a soft click of an opening door, followed by an aged creaking of unoiled hinges. Everyone looked down towards the hidden abode. "Well, that would be him now," he answered while gesturing towards the hole. Out of the morning shadows stepped a large being. He was far from human and stood at least a foot taller than Taryn. His head was a tad oversized for his body, with a large jowl that jiggled as he made his way up the slope. His skin was smooth and mottled brown, resembling an overgrown salamander that walked upright. He had a large belly and long, thick tail that dragged behind him as he ambled his way closer. 2 very beady yet kind eyes were sunken deep into his smooth, glossy skin. His clothes were simple and tattered from extended wear, and a simple vest and a short, roughly hewn pair of pants were all that he wore. His legs were bulky, and he walked with a bit of a limp. As he approached, Sam was in awe at the aura of aged wisdom around him. He reached one bony arm out and shook Taryn's hand. Whoever he was, it was obvious that they knew each other. They exchanged pleasantries. Taryn looked over to Sam, who had stopped petting the still eager warg. Sam was staring bewildered at both of them. Sam? Sam focused on Taryn but said nothing. Sam, this is Orga, the first guardian of Imagia. Alright guys, that was chapter 7, and I hope you're enjoying this. I know that it has a bit of a spacing between when I post the videos. I'm going to try to be better about that. I'm not really good about sitting down and getting this done. It takes a bit of work. But I do hope that somebody out there is enjoying them and liking the story and following along on Sam's journey. Like I said before, drop a comment in the section below. I love to hear what you guys are thinking of it. Until next time, I will see you guys later, and I thank you for supporting me. Bye.